I also enjoy, Alex, when you do streams that you're like trying to do my my buffering time, but I think now we got it right. We should be starting up now. Hello, everybody. Welcome to On the Contrary, the show that is unafraid to give you the controversial DFS opinions that all the other shows out there. It's too cowardly to give you, but we are here Saturday afternoon doing our best to bring you all the week 9 items that you need to know with ownership and all the pivots that you'll want to have in your lineups this week. I'm Chris Spags, joined as always by the top DFS player in the world, a man who does a great job for all the content we have, all the projections at Osmo.com. Alex Baker, better known to all of you guys as Osmo. How are you doing, Alex?
Doing great, man. Should be a really interesting week. We've kind of had some injury news that I think this week may be a little bit unlike any week we've had to date, where there's just one guy that maybe is a lock. Maybe you guys can talk me off him a little bit, but I look forward to kind of seeing how you guys are approaching this slate.
That's why I always call you a great guy, Alex, because now you're teasing like a professional. We are going to talk about that guy up front on the show. But first, I want to introduce our other guest from DK Lives, The Sweat, also at The Fantasy Grind on Twitter, Jeff Ulrich. How are you doing, Jeff?
Oh, I'm doing really good. Thanks a lot for having me on, guys. Obviously, big fan of the site and stuff. And I will not be the guy to talk you off the certain running back that we're about to talk about.
Well, we have to debate it like ESPN talking heads anyway in a few short minutes. But Jeff, before we get into all the games, I want to ask you one quick question, because you are working at DK Live and you have been there for a while now. And, being on the other side of the equation, even though you are in the media arm, you are probably privy to some things with DraftKings, what goes on over there. Is there anything that you've seen that you think is interesting that a player out there who's playing on DraftKings regularly might not know?
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me, just as a guy who's been with them for a while, is just the shift in moving from like being only fantasy and not being able to touch the gambling side and the betting side to where now it's more openly discussed and it's sort of ingrained with the fantasy aspect of it. So I think, obviously as DraftKings builds and the industry becomes more mature and the government becomes more rational in regards to their stances to fantasy and betting, that you'll see that more integrated. And I just feel like there's a big push now for them to get like these apps and the DK Live app, which is awesome, by the way. If you haven't downloaded the DK Live app, I'd definitely do that. It's a good tool to have just to track your things. But as that becomes more mature, just seeing how the media side has become more mature, they're putting out all these products for you to track your things, which is great because it attracts newer players, right? Which is what you want as like a more skilled DFS player. So.
Yeah, DK Live's app is a great one. That's one that I enjoy too. And actually, to the credit of the team over there, a lot better at getting alerts out. Like I think sometimes you guys are beating some of the competitors out there, some of the Twitter handles that we all follow, and a really great experience too. If you're a player on there, it's just fun to be able to track things. And if you want to get player alerts for your guys and lineups, I would definitely advocate downloading it too. And Jeff, I've done DK Live a bunch. Our own Josh Engelman, a lot of our guys have done that show, but you guys have done a bit of an overhaul with your production. There's a new studio out there, a lot of great stuff going on. So you just tell people real fast, like what's going on with DK Live and The Sweat.
Yeah, for sure. We have basically a nightly show now. It's at I gotta remember what time. It's 6 p.m. Eastern. The Sweat, but you can see it. You can check out the Twitter handle. You can check out my Twitter handle. I'm usually tweeting it out, or The Sweat DK at The Sweat DK. But yeah, it's an hour-long show. It's more. We're not diving too deep into things, but we're more going across the major stories of the day in fantasy and sports. And like you mentioned, the new studio, and we have a couple great hosts who are fun. It's just it's what I would call just an enjoyable show. It's nothing, you're probably not going to, I'm not going to say that you're going to gain like a ton of insight, but we're definitely going to cover the major news, go over some good analysts on the show too, who will give you their opinions and good opinions. So yeah, it's a fun show. We're always expanding. Also on Sunday before lock. So.
Yeah, so go check them out. Obviously, watch our live before lock shows too, but watch them both. Get your iPad with one, get your other one going. But they do a great job over there. And again, like it's always been a blast from whenever I've done the shows, and a lot of smart people on there. So go check them out. And Jeff, you're going to have to cover your ears for this part because we do have to do a quick plug for FantasyDraft.com right now. And even though we love DraftKings, DraftKings is a site that subsists off of Rake, FantasyDraft.com. Rake free. You are not paying Rake over there. All the contest entry fees do go to the winners. So go check out FantasyDraft.com right now. They are a sponsor of this show. They help us get all these great guests in week after week, help us keep the lights on the YouTube channel. And Alex, I always love to ask you, this, you are paying so much Rake out there because you are a high volume player who's winning a lot. So tell me this week, what could you have done with all the money you saved on Rake at FantasyDraft.com?
Yeah, I mean, so each entry into their main event this weekend, the 300K Hooters main event, is $25. usually on any site you're paying between 10 and 25 or 10 and 15% of that as a fee to be able to play fantasy. And I mean, well, that makes sense for businesses to charge money for their services. It's even better when they charge less. So that's what we're seeing with FantasyDraft. Each one you're saving $250 to $350 in your money. And if you add that up across multiple entries, that really starts to add up quick. And that money is in the prize pool. So that means whenever you win, you're going to win more money than other sites.
Yeah, it's just a smart move to be playing over there. So go use that promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, for your free 7-day trial into the world of rake-free DFS. And you should be playing multiple sites anyway, but taking advantage of the sites without rake, with overlay, that's going to be a big advantage for you. So go to fantasydraft.com right now. Use that promo code AWESEMO. All right, guys, let's get into the slate here. And we did our really professional radio tease up front here. Let's talk about Indianapolis at Pittsburgh and Jalen Samuels based on our latest run of ownership projections, which you can get at awesemo.com/join with the promo code Contrary to get half off your first month. Jalen Samuels going to be the chalk of the week. James Conner doubtful. Benny Snell out with a knee injury. The running game has been what the Steelers have relied on because Mason Rudolph, despite his good Monday night game, not a good quarterback by most definitions. Jalen Samuels, very cheap, possibly the chalkiest play according to our ownership projections we've had so far this year. So, Alex, I'll ask you first. Well, how are you feeling about Jalen Samuels as a potentially 50% plus owned play?
I feel good. I mean, sometimes you got to just go down with the ship, and that might be one of these weeks where it's pretty hard to get 9 players right in the first place. So having one that's pretty likely to be a great play makes it a lot easier. Of course, you're not going to gain a lot of ground on the field because so many people will have Jalen Samuels. But the thing I love about Jalen Samuels is he's kind of game script proof. He's a guy that is known as the best pass catcher of the backfield in Pittsburgh. So even if Pittsburgh is down in the game, you got to expect that there's a great chance he'll cover his salary.
And Jalen Samuels targeted 25% of the time when he's running routes out there, and you're going to assume he's going to be running more routes because there's just nobody else out there. Jeff, how are you feeling about Samuels, knowing that he's going to be so popular? He's a great value play, but maybe the ceiling a bit questionable?
I'm not even sure if his ceiling is questionable if James Conner's out. I mean, I know the ownership thing is a big deal, and you're not going to get much leverage on the field or anything like that, but you really got to analyze the situation. For me, Pittsburgh is one of those teams who they just value the running back position so much. And what I mean by that is just whoever is out there is their workhorse, and they flow basically their offense through that. They're much like Arizona, who just plugged in Kenyon Drake, and you saw him go for 160 yards. It's a similar type of situation for me with this offense. I mean, Mike Tomlin has shown that that's what he's going to do. He's going to choose one guy, and he's going to be on the field for a ton. Of Jalen Samuels, we alluded to it, but this is a player who converts like 80-90% of his targets. I mean, he is an elite pass-catching back. He's not going to get game scripted out here. At 4K, I really feel like even if he doesn't get into the end zone, I'd be pretty shocked if he ended up with less than 3X in this spot. It's not a high bust spot at all for me. I'm not someone who likes to eat chalk. I like to find and pick holes in players. This is not a spot for a guy, especially at his price around the industry. I'm interested in fading it all this week. So,
yeah, certainly a cash game lock, one would think. And also the Indianapolis defense on the year, really not great versus the rush, giving up 4.8 yards per rush, only a 55 run defense grade from PFF. Really the bigger thing they do, and Alex, I guess I'll ask you about this because I know you do like to talk about play volume. Indianapolis really succeeding because they do a good job of time of possession. They're actually the best team in terms of time of possession on this slate. And they do allow opponents to run just 59 plays per game. So that's a low play volume overall going against the Indianapolis defense. Would that give you any pause at all? I guess I'm just trying to find reasons to poke holes in Jalen Samuels.
Yeah, I think I have Indianapolis projected to run more plays in this game. Indianapolis averages 6.5 plays per drive over the year. Pittsburgh only 5.8. And that's a factor. I mean, the more plays per drive you have, the more yardage you get for your guys. But what that works out to is about I'm having trouble doing this math in my head.
Wow, it is early on the Saturday.
All right, so that works out to a 47% of the plays going to Pittsburgh. So I mean, that's not going to move the needle a ton for me.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's talk about the other side because we do have T.Y. Hilton also doubtful on the other side. The last time he was out, I believe in week 4, Chester Rogers had the most routes. Recently, it's been more Zach Pascal running a lot of routes with Chester Rogers running third. But Alex, do you see any value in going to any of these guys for Indianapolis or really anybody else in this game? Because clearly the focus and the ownership is just going to Jalen Samuels.
I think that Indianapolis is pretty tough for fantasy value here. We've seen that when T.Y. Hilton was out earlier in the season, they ran a pretty large rotation even still. So they got 4 guys, Kane, Rogers, Pascal, Campbell, who all will kind of split work. Pascal is probably the most reliable, but when you split the work so many ways, and at tight end they split it between Doyle and Ebron, this is hard to find any one guy to love.
Jeff, are you finding anybody interesting in this spot, given that it's not a great team total? Jalen Samuels, we talked about the logic behind that, but anybody else jumping out to you is maybe having some opportunity?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page. It's not really that interesting spot. No T.Y. Hilton. Pittsburgh is a pretty good defense too. I mean, they're top 5 in adjusted sack rate. So, like, Brissett might actually be under a little bit of pressure here. Their O-line's allowed seven sacks, the Indy O-line, over the last couple games. So I'm not sure if this is really a great spot for anyone on the Indy offense. Pittsburgh's defense, since kind of like they got smoked by the Patriots, have been really solid. I kind of feel like people are overlooking that too. It might be a spot for Eric Ebron to just get in the end zone a couple times, and that is one spot where Pittsburgh has struggled. Just covering against just in general under Mike Tomlin. Sometimes they just forget that position exists, put slow linebackers on them. But it's a pretty long shot, like GPP play is what I'd refer to it. Although, with some players in that range getting chalky, I guess he's worth consideration. But this is kind of just a spot I'm okay just kind of crossing off, even on a shorter slate, like with teams on buys. I don't feel the need to just dip into the Indy offense.
Yeah, I mean, I would think Marlon Mack could be a little interesting because I think that is one game script I could see them going to. Not a bad run defense going against them, but he does kind of thrive in these grinded out games. Had a decent game last week in a similar spot. I think, he's a player at 1% ownership. I don't hate the concept of, but it is tough with Indianapolis. And Jacoby Brissett also falls off a cliff when not targeting T.Y. Hilton, so it could be a tough week for the pass game in particular. Let's keep going here. Minnesota at Kansas City. Patrick Mahomes is questionable, but he looks unlikely to play now because Chad Henne is going to be active for this game. So we should see one more Matt Moore week. It is a priced up Dalvin Cook in this spot, who he looks appealing, especially as a pivot to Christian McCaffrey, not very owned because of his price up. And Kansas City, not going to be as highly owned because of not having Mahomes in there, but still some potential here, especially going against this Minnesota team who did cover a similar offense in Detroit in an interesting way where they did take away Kenny Galladay, double teamed him, and instead Marvin Jones went off. So I'm intrigued by Sammy Watkins here. But Alex, you tell me, what are you seeing in this spot here? Who are the guys that you like in this game that has an over 50-point implied total?
Well, I'll start off by saying that if Patrick Mahomes is active, it will be a little bit of a surprise. But that would be a pretty good situation because maybe you get the best quarterback in the league at low ownership. So keep an eye out for inactives an hour and a half before game time. If he's out, that makes it tough to target Kansas City because a lot of these guys are priced for Patrick Mahomes. And if Matt Moore is in, that's a huge downgrade to all the pass game. And it's a tough matchup versus Minnesota to begin with. If Mahomes is in, maybe that makes Diggs and Thielen more valuable because Minnesota will have to try to put up more points if Kansas City is putting up a lot of points. That's easier to do by passing. If he's out, then Dalvin Cook becomes kind of a more interesting play, but he is just like insanely expensive across the industry. Pretty much the most expensive player on the slate, and for a guy who's not getting 100% of the work at running back, that makes it a little tough to afford.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jeff, how are you feeling about this game here? And I guess we talked about all the contingencies there. Alex mentioned a lot of them, but is anybody jumping out to you? Let's assume that Mahomes is not going to play because it does seem that's the way the tea leaves are blowing so far.
I'm pretty interested in this game. I think especially for big GPPs, this is one you can kind of target with some, maybe not huge confidence, but there's definitely upside here. I mean, I think Matt Moore at under 5K is probably my favorite cheap quarterback. I'm just assuming Patrick Mahomes is not going to play, obviously, but again, Xavier Rhodes is a cornerback that you should have been targeting this year. I mean, he's allowing a passer rating like over 110. He's basically just setting career lows in all these major categories. I really feel like this is a spot where even with Matt Moore at quarterback, you could see Tyreek Hill go for a couple touchdowns. It wouldn't shock me. The other Minnesota quarterbacks have a huge speed differential. So I kind of like the Matt Moore, Tyreek Hill combo for big GPPs. I think that's definitely interesting. Minnesota against the run too. I mean, I really feel like the way the Chiefs are going to have to move the ball is with Matt Moore, even though that's probably not ideal. On the other side, I kind of agree with Alex. Like, I do think Dalvin Cook's going to get chalky. There's a couple reasons why, but I do think people are going to play those cheap Carolina wide receivers. And I think a lot of people are just going to think, well, I got one Carolina player. I don't necessarily want to pay up for Christian McCaffrey. I'll just pay down for Dalvin Cook, who's in a really good spot against the Chiefs. And he is in a good spot, but I do think the ownership's going to get up there. So pivoting over to Diggs or another pass catcher might not be a bad idea either.
Okay, yeah, that seems fair. And I guess, you know what, we're going to talk about another game first, but since we did talk about Christian McCaffrey a little bit, let's jump to the Carolina game. He's clearly the relevant player here, though, as Jeff mentioned, there should be some ownership for the Carolina receivers as well. McCaffrey projects for high ownership despite being the first player this year to cross that 10K salary threshold on DraftKings, and he's certainly deserving of it, but he's going against a Tennessee run defense, 87 graded by PFF, and we have seen him struggle against a team in Tampa Bay who does also squash the run pretty well. Alex, I'll ask you first. Christian McCaffrey, very high price, similar to Dalvin, took that big price up. I actually am intrigued by Dalvin because of McCaffrey taking the price up. We have a pretty big ownership discrepancy between those two guys. But McCaffrey, certainly a more solid play. He has the full workload, as you mentioned. So how are you feeling about McCaffrey at 10K in a tough defensive matchup?
Yeah, I feel like McCaffrey, in my opinion, is superior to Cook because he's on the field 100% of the time almost, while Cook, he gives up some work to Alexander Madison. And the total running back production is comparable on Carolina and Minnesota. This matchup versus Tennessee is not ideal. I mean, the Carolina Panthers only have a 22 team total, but Christian McCaffrey makes up so much of that given that we have some good value, like we've been talking about, I could see paying up for him, but I don't think he's essential by any means.
Jeff, how are you feeling about McCaffrey here? We have him projected at about 30% ownership right now, which would make him one of the higher owned plays of the week. Not quite Jalen Samuels, but who is in today's workaday world? But how are you feeling about McCaffrey in the spot going against an impressive Tennessee defense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like he's a must play either this week. But I do feel like for GPPs, you're going to get lower ownership than you've seen in a while. I just feel like that, especially on DraftKings, he's hit that 10K range, that 5-digit, which is always a bit of a psychological barrier. It should drive his ownership just a couple percent lower just on that alone. And then again, I mentioned I do feel like the Carolina wide receivers are going to garner ownership, and I feel like people will just say, I've already got one Carolina player, I don't want two. I don't mind going to McCaffrey and GPPs. I mean, he's basically operating as a number one wide receiver and a number one running back. So even if Tennessee squashes him against the run, there's every chance he could see 15 targets in this game and pay off through that. So I think his upside is still pretty much similar. It's not the greatest matchup, I agree. I mean, I feel like Tennessee in that Tampa game you mentioned are pretty similar in terms of defenses. But I think GPPs, you definitely need to consider going to him over Cook, although I do see the value in Cook this week in that matchup.
Yeah, and as Jeff mentioned, we actually do have both Carolina receivers projected at about 18% ownership on DraftKings, so the value play there seems like it'll be one that a good amount of people will be taking. I think it's a tough spot, but one that McCaffrey has certainly proven that even in the games where he's had a low rushing yard output versus Tampa Bay, still did get in the end zone enough times that he's enough of a vessel of that offense. They need him to be successful to have any shot at hitting their implied total. Alex, to run it back, anybody on Tennessee's side appealing? I know people have been chasing Ryan Tannehill. I'd be more inclined for Derrick Henry because Carolina's run defense is pretty bad. But how are you feeling about the Tennessee side?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that Corey Davis may be a kind of worth a flyer in a lineup or two, but Derrick Henry is really the guy I'm looking at this game. I think that a couple things. He's pretty cheap for a guy who gets the majority of the work. 5,700 DraftKings, 6,800 FanDuel, 19 Yahoo, 10.6 on FantasyDraft. So this is like a mid-range play, and we know that he's gone out, at least in previous years, and gotten you 30, 40 points on a good day. And I mean, this matchup versus Carolina is not particularly encouraging, but I think that the price is right.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And Jeff, how are you feeling about Tennessee? Any interest in any of these guys?
I mean, I've kind of been chasing the Derrick Henry bigger game the last couple slates. It hasn't paid off, obviously, but I think this spot is probably my favorite of the spots for Henry over the last month. I mean, Carolina's allowing 5 yards per carry. I mean, that's kind of how you want to attack them because they have one of the best. I think they're still number 1 or 2 in adjusted sack rate, and Tennessee does not have a good offensive line in terms of pass protection. So Tennessee's path to win this game is run Derrick Henry. I do think he can have some success. And again, I know you mentioned Marlon Mack as a lower owned. I mean, you guys have Derrick Henry out there, I think 6.2 ownership projection. I'm fine with taking a little bit more ownership on Henry just because I like this spot better. I think they're similar backs in terms of upside, what they do. So, but for me, I'd choose Henry. He's a little bit cheaper too.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And also Carolina giving up a 6.3% rushing TD rate, 135 rushing yards per game, in addition to that 5 yards per rush number that Jeff mentioned. So it has been a defense for Carolina that gives up run production. And Derrick Henry, all about the run. Not going to give you a lot in the way of catches, but he's all about that run. Guys, hit that like button too, by the way. As always, the takes and the opinions on the show as expressed are only as accurate as the amount of likes we get. So please hit that like button as we go on here because it helps us just keep everything up, keep us bumping up the algorithms and all that. Let's talk about Seattle at Tampa Bay. Another high-totaled game. Seattle projecting for a ton of ownership, including Chris Carson, who's running into the buzzsaw Tampa Bay defense, one of the best ones in the league, who are allowing a not-so-nice 69 rushing yards per game. Alex, I'll throw it to you. Is this game that fantasy must have? The ownership looks like it'll be like, with Seattle in particular, going to be owned out the wazoo, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I've loved Jameis Winston every game that he's played so far almost because Tampa Bay, they just have such a bad rushing offense that they just pass the ball so much, and they got 2 guys in Godwin and Evans that can really move the ball, and that makes it really appealing to stack up. And Seattle's defense has taken a big step down this year, below average in pass and run defense. I mean, Seattle also pretty appealing. As you mentioned, maybe Chris Carson isn't in the greatest spot with Tampa being strong against the run, but across the industry, his price kind of is very it's cheap on Yahoo at 22, so I think he might be the chalk on Yahoo, but a little bit of a pay up to be contrarian spot on the other sites. And I mean, Lockett and Metcalf are the guys you want to look for as wide receivers, and they seem like they're pretty easy to get this week, especially with the value.
Jeff, how are you feeling about these guys? And Chris Carson in particular, who we also have projected to be a pretty comparable ownership to McCaffrey, about 32% owned. Pass game, though, seems like it'd be more appealing here going against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay being getting strafed by the pass all year, giving up 290 passing yards per game. What are you finding appealing in this game and on the Seattle side in particular?
Yeah, I mean, obviously from an ownership projection standpoint, I'm not really finding this game appealing. I was a little bit surprised it got this much heat. I mean, I understand it. Obviously, I like this game at the start of the week. It's just that when you're walking in now and you see all these guys at 20%, it kind of makes it an interesting fade. On the other hand, Tampa Bay's allowed 3 rushing touchdowns on the year. This just screams Russell Wilson 4-touchdown game. I mean, it really does. So he's expensive. I mentioned Matt Moore as a cheap QB. I think if you're going to get contrarian in big GPPs, I think the way to go is fade the top QBs and go with the cheap QB. But man, this spot, just from a pure analytical matchup spot, it's great for Russell Wilson. So I prefer going with Wilson at QB if I'm choosing, and I like coming back with Mike Evans too, who I think is in a bit of a mismatch. And neither of these teams have great pass rushes either, so I feel like Winston is probably in a good spot too to at least get the ball to Mike Evans. I would probably prefer him slightly over Chris Godwin, all things considered. Obviously 30 targets over his last 2 games essentially. They really seem to be trying to get the ball to him. I think Cameron Braid is interesting too. He's really cheap. Obviously, O.J. Howard. I think Braid is still questionable, so you have to check him on Sunday. But there's a lot to like here. I do prefer, if you're going with a pure game stack, other spots. But yeah, like I said, I think Wilson here, especially if you can pay up for him in cash games, makes a ton of sense to me. So.
Alex, Jeff mentioned the potential game stack here. If you were to game stack it, which quarterback would you prefer out of going with Jameis or Russell Wilson?
This one's pretty easy for me because I think Russell Wilson's the more popular quarterback. I believe he's the most popular of the week. And I mean, I agree with Jeff that it's a good spot for him. This game really sets up for Seattle to run. But what I'm looking at here is that Seattle runs the ball almost half the time, and Tampa Bay is a little bit less than 40%. So that's just more passing plays on average you're going to get from Jameis Winston. And that kind of gives him a little bit more upside, and he's lower owned. So I don't mind taking some shots there.
Anybody in this game, Alex, I'll ask you first. Anybody in this game who's like a dart toss to you who could have some upside? Because it does seem, Russell likes to spread the ball around. We've seen some big Jerron Brown games. And, Tampa Bay, if Cameron Brate isn't in, they have a rookie tight end or a guy who was really good in the preseason whose name now escapes me, but I heard touted actually on Adam Levitan's podcast on DraftKings. Any sort of dart throws in this game who you would take who are going to be less around?
That's a really tough one. I think that the guy you're talking about is Tanner Hudson.
Yeah, that's him. That's him.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, if Braid's out, I think that would make sense. But the Tampa Bay running backs are the only ones I can think of that might be in play. But they split the work pretty evenly, and they don't run the ball well at all. So I probably won't find myself landing on them.
Jeff, any sort of dart throw guys in here? Because this is the highest total or highest combined total of the slate, it looks like. Anybody jumping out to you that maybe is worth that 1% stab?
I mean, Jerron Brown, David Moore, definitely with Russell Wilson. Oh, they just need one deep ball basically to pay off, and definitely in play. I think I'd probably lean Moore. He's been playing more consistent snaps the last couple weeks. Maybe a little bit better deep ball player. I've been chasing Jacob Hollister a little bit too since Will Dissly went down. It hasn't really paid off, but he's a far better pass catcher than Luke Wilson, and I wonder at some point if he's going to kind of take on a bigger role. So I think that's probably a little bit too deep. I think I'd rather roll with one of those wide receivers I mentioned, just because it's way better chance of like a 50-yard touchdown. So,
Jeff, I'll ask you first. Seattle defense a thought at all, given how Jameis, Alex has loved him in every game, but the guy does still love to throw picks about as much as anybody. A 5% interception rate on the year. Yeah,
I mean, they're not my favorite pay-up spot for defense, but at the same time, Jameis Winston is like still in the league leaders for INTs. So the one thing I'd say, like, Seattle isn't the greatest cover team at home either. So like the home, I don't know. I just feel like Tampa's gonna be able to keep this game close. I feel like I'm not loving the spot, but I get the argument for Winston. So not my favorite pay-up spot for defense, but definitely can consider them at the very least.
Alex, I'll ask you too, any interest in either defense here just to try to get leverage on the field, given that both sides are going to have a lot of chalk?
I think the Seattle defense is kind of interesting for the reason you mentioned. Not a great value by any means, but when you have Mike Evans nearly 30% owned, Chris Godwin nearly 25%, you got to think that you can gain some leverage on the field, just hoping they have a bad day.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's keep going here. Next game I want to hit on. Here's a fun one. The Jets at Miami. So implied total here, slowly moving upwards for the Jets. Miami's also not the worst either. Jets at almost 23 implied points. Miami at almost 20. Miami defense, we know what they do. They just get their asses kicked every week, basically. When they look good, they still give up a massive day to Mason Rudolph, who I would say is a worse quarterback than Sam Darnold, but I don't know if you guys will agree. But Alex, I'm really intrigued by the Jets stack here. I'll throw it to you first because I want to hear your thoughts, and you can kill me on this if you want. But to me, Darnold, Robbie Anderson, I think really intriguing alongside Le'Veon Bell, whose ownership is now coming down a bit because some of the ownership rising through Jalen Samuels and the other guys. So I think this Jets stack has a lot of potential this week, and I think they have a lot of get well spots coming up over the next 6 or so weeks. How are you feeling about Darnold and the Jets and this whole offense?
I think, if there's any week you should focus on the Jets, this is definitely the week versus Miami. They've been pretty abysmal in defense, so we've seen guys have monster games versus them. The one thing I don't love about the Jets is how much they spread out the ball. So what I'm seeing here in my notes is that Robbie Anderson is targeted 18% of the time. Le'Veon Bell 18%. Crowder 19%. Thomas even higher. So they're just splitting the ball a lot of different ways, and it will be hard to kind of pinpoint the right guy to stack Darnold with.
How are you feeling about Bell, though, as the option here? His price is up. He hasn't had that big game. He actually had his worst game since the 2016 playoffs fantasy-wise last week in terms of his production. And it just seems like a bounce-back spot for a guy who they didn't trade, but maybe needs to be placated a bit after not getting traded. And he is, you like talking about this in basketball, I know, with Otto Porter, who actually went off yesterday. Le'Veon Bell getting paid a lot. So how are you feeling about him as a play that's ownership seems like it's trickling downwards?
I think you got all of Bell here. I mean, he's a guy that gets a huge workload, pretty much all the snaps, or most of the snaps at running back, and it's a spot where they're favored, so the game flow should be good. I'm seeing only green lights here.
Jeff, how are you feeling about this Jets attack? And tell me you're on a little bit of Sam Darnold and Robbie Anderson, because I want somebody to be like, yeah, that's a great play.
I mean, I think I honestly I can't get behind the huge like a 3-stack Jets. I can get behind targeting one or two players for sure. Like I can get behind Robbie Anderson. I don't think I'd go to Sam Darnold. The Jets play the second slowest pace in the league. I just feel like I'm not sure if the ceiling is high enough for 3 Jets players. I do feel like either Robbie Anderson or Lev Bell could definitely come through here with a big game. I feel like there might be some kind of coach's gift here to Lev Bell, who's kind of been complaining a little bit about not getting enough touches. He's definitely still seeing the field though, like Alex alluded to. I mean, he's over 85% of the snaps, so it's not like he's not playing. He's just not getting enough touches. So this could be the game where he finally ends up with like 6 or 8 targets. He had that one big target game, and then his targets have diminished. So you never really know what Adam Gase is going to do, which again kind of worries me in this spot a little bit. I will say this, I wouldn't write off the Miami players either. Like I think Preston Williams is really interesting. Tremaine Johnson is out for the Jets. Their remaining 3 cornerbacks are all like ranked in the hundreds in terms of like PFF rankings. Like they're not good. Preston Williams did really well against Joe Hayden in Pittsburgh last week. He's a very talented player. I think at some point he's going to end up with like a 100-yard touchdown game, and this could easily be the spot. So I like Preston Williams. And actually, if you're thinking about like a flex switch from Jalen Samuels, you really just want to fade Jalen Samuels, I kind of like going there because they're around the same price. So that's kind of my take on this game.
How about Mark Walton? Because he's getting the workload. Kalen Ballage not really involved. He has taken away the red zone looks. He's a primary goal line back. But Mark Walton, we have projected at 22% ownership, which good for Mark Walton, but doesn't seem like the strongest play here. How are you feeling about him, Jeff?
This complete fade for me. There's other guys I think that are better to swerve to. I mean, again, one thing the Jets do well is stop the run. I mean, under 4 yards per carry on the season. They still got some good run stoppers up front in their front 7. Very kind of a funnel defense, like a traditional funnel defense, just like Tampa Bay. So I think Walton is a pretty easy fade. There's a couple other guys. Obviously, you can just pay down for Samuel too. So easy fade Walton for me.
Alex, are you riding with Mark Walton this week, given that he's more expensive than Jalen Samuels and also going to have a fifth of the field on him?
Well, I agree with Jeff that the matchup for the run game isn't very good for Walton, but I love the value. I mean, he was on the field 50 snaps out of 57 for Miami last week, and he gets targeted a decent amount, 17 targets on 76 routes so far this year. And what that equals is a pretty big workload, and he's really cheap. So I'll definitely be taking some stabs here.
All right, let's keep going here. And here, okay, so I really want to talk about this game. And I know, Alex, I think you're not going to be big on this, but Washington at Buffalo, Dwayne Haskins going to be the starter, Case Keenum in the concussion protocol. So I'm just going to go through Dwayne Haskins' numbers because this is one of my favorite stats of the year overall with him. So overall, Dwayne Haskins has, actually, I want to make sure I completely nail all this correctly. On the year overall, Dwayne Haskins has an 18% interception rate, a 15% sack rate. He's completing 55% of his passes. Buffalo, a good defense who blitzes at a fairly high rate. Under pressure, Dwayne Haskins has a 40% sack rate, a 2.1 yards per pass on these pressured dropbacks. He also has a 20% interception rate when he's pressured and an overall QB rating of 5, along with an accuracy rating of 25% when he's pressured. So I don't think Dwayne Haskins is good, but he could be one of those guys who's just been so bad that he's due for some regression. And I know you like Terry McLaurin a little bit as one of your contrarian plays. Your thoughts on Dwayne Haskins and his prospects this week going against Buffalo?
I mean, I don't think they're very good prospects by any means. I'm not going to take a stand here against Buffalo has been really good against the pass this year so far. And Dwayne Haskins, although he's only thrown 22 passes, as you pointed out, been pretty bad. I'm just worried they're kind of getting him in before he's really an NFL quarterback on a team where they're not even valuable for full-strength quarterbacks. So I think that the spot I'm interested on Washington is defense because they're just like insanely cheap across the industry, 1,800 on DraftKings, and Josh Allen not the greatest at ball protection. So I mean, that seems like a huge value to me.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The Buffalo defense, though, is that something you would pay for? I mean, the Washington defense is a great value, as you mentioned. You have them well graded in your rankings as well, which, of course, you get at osmo.com/join. But what else are you feeling about the Buffalo defense? Because they are one of the higher priced ones on the slate, and also they now look like the chalkiest.
That's interesting. I mean, Haskins is throwing 4 picks and 22 passes, so I could definitely see maybe the Buffalo defense being huge this weekend. I will throw in a caveat where if Haskins throws a couple picks, he'll probably get pulled from the game. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, Jeff, how are you feeling about the spot here? And don't let my litany of stats about Dwayne Haskins being terrible sully your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get behind like some kind of McLaren stat here, but it's pretty dicey. I mean, obviously, it's a nice player to target in GPPs because he can obviously pay off with like 4 targets, but that legitimately might be all he gets. I mean, Washington is second last in terms of pass attempts per game. They obviously tried to limit Haskins when he came in the second half last week. He still only had 1 week taking first team snaps. And the problem with Dwayne Haskins is he's been treated like a third string quarterback all season. So it's not like he's going to have like this 1 week isn't going to be a huge factor in my opinion. I mean, he hasn't been taking first team reps. It's really nothing against the skill level, but like Jay Gruden isn't there anymore as like this QB whisperer either. So I'm just not sure how big a change you're going to get. I think Buffalo defense, as chalky as they might be, still could be in line for like a 20-point game or something, which is a little bit scary because, when obviously high-priced defenses go off and you don't have a piece, it's a little bit dicey, but it could be one of those spots. I'm a little bit more interested in the guy like Devin Singletary on the other side than any Washington player.
How a Singletary, a guy who should be benefiting a bit from a not too great Washington run defense there. Frank Gore as well, still getting carries. I guess the Buffalo offense overall, Jeff, you mentioned Singletary, but would you play any of these guys besides Singletary?
Probably not. Again, it's just the opponent. I'm just not sure how many throws like Josh Allen is going to have in this game. I mean, John Brown and him obviously a pretty efficient combo, but I think if I was going to go anywhere, I'd go with Singletary. 68% of the snaps last week. Obviously, the game flow was more his style with them getting behind a little bit, but I do feel like coming off injury, having 2 games now, you'll probably see him creep back into a bit of more of a main role. And you like the PPR upside too. Obviously, he's a player who can take one to the house. We talked about Mark Walton, but I really do feel like in that range, Singletary has a bit better upside. So yeah, that's probably my main target from the Buffalo side.
Yeah, Singletary, a very explosive player on the year, averaging a very unsustainable 8.6 yards per attempt, but still been having a lot of burst and looking much better than Frank Gore, but still not seeing that workload. Alex, any of these guys look good to you? I mean, you mentioned the Washington defense being in play. They are cheap, and Josh Allen is known to be a little bit loose with the ball, despite what a stellar player he is overall. He's really hurting my Josh Allen narratives. But he is going against the Washington team who gives up a 73% completion rate, so maybe he's got some upside. Anything you're seeing at all in the Buffalo offense, Alex?
Yeah, I think Washington has been about an average defense so far this year, and that's good enough for some of these guys because of prices. So on DraftKings and FantasyDraft, I'm looking at Cole Beasley. He's been targeted a lot when he's been running routes, almost 22% this year. And he doesn't have great efficiency, but that adds up for his price tag. And on FanDuel, we have John Brown at 6,200. That's the lowest of any of the sites. And he does a little bit more with the passes. He's gotten the same number of targets as Beasley this year. So I think that given that he's more of a deep ball threat, he could be a good GPP play on FanDuel.
All right, that makes sense. Let's keep going here. One game I wanted to hit on, and again, guys, please hit that like button. Helps us keep the lights on, and also again, go to osmo.com/join and check out the packages on there. Use the promo code Contrary to get half off your first month of Osmo Plus, and you can also get Alex's own projections there. They are his projections for the NFL, the NBA, all the sports right now. So everything that Alex is using right now, you can have at your fingertips. So go to osmo.com/join and check them out. So, Alex, I'm into this game. Actually, no, I'll go Jeff first. For some reason, I'm going to Alex first every time. I usually go back and forth, and I don't know why. But this week, Detroit at Oakland. I'm really intrigued by this game. Matthew Stafford, to me, being slept on quite a bit. This week, it seems to be the case again, not getting much ownership. Galladay's been priced up quite a bit, but we do know he has a monster upside. He was in a lot of tournament-winning lineups last week. And Oakland on the other side, a high projected total and over 50-point combined total here. So, Jeff, how are you feeling about this game, and Detroit in particular with not much ownership on them?
I'm surprised. I mean, I think people are sleeping on Matt Stafford. It's probably my favorite spot for GPPs, like a double Matt Stafford stack, going with Galloway and another receiver. Oakland is just, they traded away Garrett Connolly, their best quarterback for some reason, and they've just been sieve-like. I mean, 13 passing touchdowns in their last 4 games, the third most passing yards allowed per game as a defense. Matthew Stafford's having a bit of a revival season. I feel like it's just going under the radar and people aren't paying attention here. So Galloway is obviously priced up, but I think that's going to keep his ownership down, which is nice. You mentioned Stafford being slept on. I just feel like with all these other high-priced quarterbacks, Stafford's basically the same price as them across most sites, and his ownership is going to be like, I think you guys have him projected for like 4%, which to me is a little bit shocking. This is a monster spot. Detroit's defense isn't that good either. So this is my favorite spot of the week, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, okay, I'm glad. Hopefully, Alex, you can complete the trio here. We can do a clean sweep. How are you feeling about Detroit side of this equation? You're heading into Oakland, heading into the black hole, and I guess one thing to note is that their implied total has stayed flat the entire week at 24 points. It hasn't come up as I thought it would, but how are you feeling?
I think that Detroit could be a good contrarian play. This game, Detroit and Oakland, they have some really good options for fantasy. I mean, Darren Waller has been kind of the best tight end in fantasy almost every week, and I don't think this is any different against the Detroit team, who's not that impressive defensively. And then on Detroit's side, we got Kenny Galladay, Jones, and Amendola. Kind of pick your favorites of the week. They are priced up quite a bit across the industry, so that does make it harder to get to Stafford as well. So it might be a little bit more site specific for me for Detroit.
And the Oakland side, Josh Jacobs having a bit of growth as a rookie here, getting a lot of volume there. And Oakland, to their credit, has done a good job bleeding the clock out. That's one reason they've been able to avoid just getting completely destroyed defensively. They're allowing less plays per game and also just kind of controlling the ball pretty well in offense with both Waller and Jacobs. And to a lesser extent, Ty Williams, who just seems to find a touchdown every week. But Jeff, how are you feeling about Josh Jacobs, Ty Williams, Darren Waller, these guys here? Darren Waller going to be chalky, but Jacobs and Williams not terribly highly owned despite a really high team total for Oakland.
Yeah, I think Jacobs is fine at his ownership percentage or his projections right now. I mean, this is a Detroit team who's allowed 8 touchdowns to running backs over the last 4 games. Like, this is how you attack it. Almost 5 yards per carry as well. So this is setting up, like I said. I mean, you have the Detroit passing offense against one of the weakest secondaries, and then you have the Oakland rushing offense, and John Gruden wants to run the ball. He's come out and said, like, he wants to bring it back to whatever, 1990 or whatever. So this is what he wants to do. It really feels like 2 offenses are going to be able to do whatever they want, and a real possibility of like a 35-32 game or something on tap. So I like Jacobs. I don't mind taking a little bit of ownership. I don't think he's anywhere near too chalky. But again, like, Darius Slay is questionable. They're a little bit banged up in the secondary too. I'd really watch if Slay doesn't play. I think Tyrell Williams could definitely be like the contrarian player.
Yeah, and he did a good job last week taking some of the production away from Waller when he was chalky. Waller, though, in a very good bounce-back spot here going against Detroit. Alex, I'll ask you, Josh Jacobs, Terrell Williams, Darren Waller, you talked about a little bit, but how are you feeling about the Oakland side of the equation here, and are any of these guys more appealing than the others relative to their ownership?
Yeah, I think that Josh Jacobs, he's a nice fantasy play pretty much every week too, just because he gets so much of the rushing work. I've been projected for about 70%. He splits the passing more with some other guys, but gets a little bit of production there. But the main thing is they have a big team total, 26. I mean, the price tag isn't too high. He's best priced on FantasyDraft at 11.9 and FanDuel at 7.2. So I think that you can definitely play some Jacobs, and the fact that we have some really chalky running backs should drive down his ownership.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Jacobs, too, also getting a good amount of red zone work, as you would expect, but getting 3 red zone rushes, 1.7 rushes per game inside the 10, and almost one rush inside the 5 per game, which is actually one of the better marks in the league. So very involved at the goal line, and that's sort of what you'd want out of Jacobs in addition to his overall work. So I think this game to me is one of the better sneaky stacks. But I'll ask you, Jeff, first. How are you feeling about the other games here? Any jumping out to you as being one that's particularly appealing, or any players that look particularly appealing to you that we haven't hit on?
I think just from a pure like game scenario, Green Bay, the Chargers has quite a bit of potential for me to put up some points. I mean, obviously with Aaron Rodgers playing so well, and I think it really comes down to Davante Adams. Like, I could really see Davante Adams just come back with a big game. But the running backs for Green Bay are in a great spot too. I mean, both Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones. Jamal Williams priced up a bit now, which kind of sucks, them sharing snaps. But one of the two could definitely have a good game, and stacking them with Rodgers, who's obviously throwing to his running backs more than probably at any point in his career, isn't the worst idea. I guess you're going to have to wait on that Devontae Adams news. But again, that's only going to keep ownership down too. On the flip side too, I think the Chargers are going to be able to run the ball a little bit here. Like, I guess I was going to say Melvin Gordon for the end, but I do feel like Melvin Gordon's at his lowest price point of the year. He's still playing like 50-60% of the snaps, still getting more red zone touches than Austin Eckler over the last 4 weeks. I know the prevailing wisdom is like Melvin Gordon sucks now and Eckler is the better player, and that might be true, but I think this is a good spot for Melvin Gordon to potentially bust out. So wouldn't shock me there.
I'm actually very with you on Melvin Gordon. I think he's a nice low price point. Green Bay's one weakness this year has really been against the rush. They're giving up almost 5 rushing yards per attempt and also not that great according to the PFF grades. So I think it could be a spot with Gordon as well. But Alex, I'll ask you about the Green Bay side first. How are you feeling about their prospects here, given the fact that they don't seem to trust their receivers anymore? Devontae Adams is still questionable, and Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams have both been going off with Aaron Rodgers somehow having monster days just passing to his running backs.
Yeah, if Adams is out, it's pretty tough to pin down the production because MVS, Allison, Kumaro, and Lazard have been kind of doing a rotation where no one guy is on the field for the whole game. That makes him not that appealing for fantasy, but if he's in, he would be the target for me to pair with Rodgers. I mean, the price isn't great, but he's a great talent. And this game, it seems to have a lot of potential, so I could see doing a Rodgers-Adams stack.
And how are you feeling about Melvin Gordon? I guess the Chargers overall. Phillip Rivers also projects pretty well for you as a value play. I think sort of a questionable ceiling in terms of his overall points in your projection. But the Chargers offense, obviously had their flaws. The offensive line in general really not looking good. But any of these guys popping to you at all?
I think Rivers is a great option. They're the underdog in the game, so they should have to throw the ball a little bit more than normal. And Keenan Allen has gotten a bit of a price down. Mike Williams is dirt cheap across the industry. Not having a great season, but he's getting the targets, so I like going to those guys. Hunter Henry has been pretty incredible. He's a bit priced up though, so don't love him, but kind of mixing and matching these guys and landing with a lot of Rivers.
Okay, that seems fair. And also some complaining about the clicking, but I'm going to defend you in the chat right now. You can click whenever you want in my book, Alex. I feel like it's still not as bad as it was a couple months ago.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought guys love the banging of the keyboard, but it turned out we got a lot of complaints about that.
I just imagine it's a musical background that you're just you're jamming out for all of us. Alex, I'll ask you the same question I asked Jeff. Any of the guys that we haven't hit on or games compelling to you? We have an Nick Chuba we haven't hit on. We also have the Chicago game. Mitch Trubisky really didn't look bad last week, but still didn't do enough. And now he's facing that Eagles defense who loves giving up big plays when they're not having media controversies. How are you feeling about any of these teams that we have left or players?
Man, I think we covered most of the good games. Jeff took the one I was going to call out, the LA Chargers versus Green Bay. Yeah, I mean, I'm always rooting for Trubisky, but they only have a team total of 18, so it's hard to really say that game's going to be a game of the week.
All right. Any thoughts on that for you, Jeff?
I mean, Trubisky, Allen Robinson stack is interesting. It just feels like it's at the point where everyone's just kind of had enough with this chasing Mr. Trubisky. At some point, you got to figure that the guy who was in there and won people multiple millionaire makers, this is still going to come out, and this would probably be the spot. Like the Philly secondary is so weak. I think outside of one matchup against Luke Falk, basically everyone's thrown at least two passing touchdowns against them. So. I really do feel like Mitch Trubisky at that low price and Allen Robinson, it could be a spot for them. It's obviously completely boom or bust, but I have no confidence in Matt Nagy's going to do the right thing and kind of unleash Trubisky a little bit. But yeah, I do feel like at that price, depressed and pretty easy to fit in. That's an interesting stack this week for me.
Yeah, Robinson, a guy, does jump out a bit with 9 targets a game. He's one of the highest targeted players in the league. Also getting almost 2 deep targets a game. And we know with Philly, as we saw with Stephon Diggs in particular, just get multiple 50-yard touchdown passes. Robinson can certainly get there. Even if Trubisky doesn't have a great day, you can certainly see Allen Robinson get there. Real fast here, once again, thank you to FantasyDraft.com. Of course, go check them out right now. They are the official home of Rake Free DFS. So go support them. Go over there, use the promo code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, for your free 7-day trial, and check out the Hooters main event, a gigantic tournament, Rake Free. All the contest fees go to the winners. So go check them out at FantasyDraft.com right now with that promo code AWESEMO. And also go to awesemo.com/join. Use that promo code Contrary to get half off your first month of Awesemo Plus. We have all the ownership projections and player projections right from Alex. So go check out all the data that he's using, that we're all using right now at awesemo.com/join. All right, we're on to the final stretch here, our contrarian picks, the one where we get to feel the most vulnerable. And Jeff, I have not thrown to you enough, so I'll throw to you first for the one where I get to put you on the spot. Contrarian QB pick for week 9, who would it be?
I'll go with Matt Moore. I really do feel like it's a good spot. The Minnesota pass defense just hasn't been good, mainly Xavier Rhodes. Kansas City, I think, is going to have to pass the ball. And I don't think Matt Moore is quite as bad as people think. So I'll go with Matt Moore there. And again, really cheap around the industry. So he's not going to have to do like a ton to pay off.
Alex, how about you? Who'd be your contrarian QB?
I'll go with, there's one we talked about. I think it's pretty obvious. Matt Stafford. Pretty appealing matchup versus Oakland in a game that should be competitive, and I think there's a lot of potential there.
Well, I was going to go Matt Stafford, but you know what? I'm the bravest of us all because I'm going to go to Sam Darnold, and I hope his swollen spleen has a great week here out in Miami. Hopefully the humidity gets that spleen down to normal sizes from his mono, and he throws a lot of touchdowns to Robbie Anderson. So that's my pick. Jeff, back to you. Contrarian running back pick. Who would it be?
Jalen Samuels. No, I'm just kidding. I'll go with Melvin Gordon. I'm going to stick with that call. I do feel like Melvin Gordon's been back for a few weeks. I feel like it's a decent spot for the Chargers to put up a lot of points. Even if they don't win the game, I think they're going to keep it close.
Alex, how about you? Who'd be your contrarian running back pick?
Jeff, I got to be contrary here, man. I'm going with Austin Eckler, the other running back. It's kind of anyone's guess who has a better game, but he hasn't been getting as many rushing attempts, but he's the guy in the backfield, really efficient with his targets. And I'm thinking maybe with this new offensive coordinator, maybe they give Eckler the ball a little bit more. That's just wishful thinking maybe, but we'll see how it plays out.
And I am going to go to Derrick Henry. We talked about him a little bit earlier. Just think it's a nice spot. I think they're going to have a tough time passing for Tennessee against that Carolina defense. And Derrick Henry just hasn't had that monster Derrick Henry day. And I'm predicting him to have 300 yards and 4 touchdowns this week. He's due for all the positive regression. As we all know, Derrick Henry loves doing it when nobody's on him. Alex, I'll throw it back to you. Contrarian wide receiver pick for week 9. Who would it be?
This one's interesting because, I see one guy at 1% who's really jumping out at me. Stephon Diggs. Him and Thielen are projected to get almost no ownership, and I think it's because they're priced up a bit. But that's the classic pick to be contrarian spot where, you have a lot of salary saving options this week. Maybe you can afford to take a stab on one of these guys, and while they don't have a great projection, if Minnesota is put to the test, they could easily produce.
Jeff, how are you? Who'd be your contrarian wide receiver pick?
I was going to go with Preston Williams, but I'm looking again, and you guys have Tyreek Hill at under 1%. I think under 0.5% projected ownership. And if I have Matt Moore as my quarterback, Tyreek Hill, people forget Tyreek Hill went off with Alex Smith as quarterback for a couple of years, and he can still return a kick for a touchdown. So I think this could be a really, really nice spot for Tyreek Hill as a contrarian play.
And I'm going to go to Robbie Anderson. Big Bob Anderson is what I'm going to call him this week because I think he's going to go nuts on Miami. No Xavier Howard in there. He's out. Who is going to defend Robbie Anderson as he runs downfield, free flowing against the Miami defense who gives up 10 air yards per target, 8.7 yards per pass. I think Robbie Anderson goes nuts, and you will all rue the day that you don't play Robbie Anderson. Jeff, who would be your fade of the week here to round us out? The toughest one where you're putting yourself on the spot.
Right. Yeah, and that's also the one that I forgot to pick, so I'm going to have to do this on the spot here. Actually, I'll go with Chris Carson. I'm not a huge Chris Carson fan to begin with. He's not a super explosive player. He's kind of more volume-based. I mentioned Tampa is just run defense. I really feel like it's all going to come through Russell Wilson this week, who's in a bit of a bounce-back spot. So I think 7,200, I think it's okay to fade Chris Carson in that spot.
Alex, how about you? Who'd be your fade of the week?
I've never been more confident in my fade of the week, so that means you should definitely play him in your lineups. I'm going with DK Metcalf. We have him projected for 24% ownership, and I just don't understand that at all. He's gotten targeted 45 times, which isn't bad, but that's only 16% of the time he runs the routes. So that's not really justifying the salary or even much less the ownership, in my opinion. Yeah, so I think that I just don't get it.
Yeah, he's priced up too, and he had the 2 touchdowns last week, but he had like 11 receiving yards. So he is more of a deep threat, though. Maybe we'll see it this week. My fade of the week, Chris Carson is a great one. I think actually in our syllabus thing, which we have at osmo.com, where we all make our picks, I believe we all had Chris Carson. So that's a good one too. I'm going to go weird. I'm going to go Christian McCaffrey just because I like him. I think he's a great player. I do think his ownership, I'd rather have Dalvin Cook. I think Dalvin's going to smash against Kansas City. I know the workload there's a lot of risk with that with Alex Madison and what a beast he is, but McCaffrey is highly owned and highly priced. And if Cook does better at 20% less ownership, I think that's a possibility going against Kansas City, who has allowed Carlos Hyde to have monster days. So I think Dalvin Cook can do it. Jeff, we'd like to turn the floor over to our guests each week to plug whatever they want in the world. Could be the stuff you're doing at DK Live, could be your Twitter, could be adorable photos of your kids you told us about before the show. So tell me, what do you want to plug right now, Jeff?
You don't want to look at my kids. I'll throw a few up on Twitter if you want, but at the Fantasy Grind, give me a follow on Twitter. But you definitely check out The Sweat on DK. It's at The Sweat DK on Twitter. Like I said, it's a nightly show, 6 p.m. Eastern. So it's just a nice thing to do before locks too, a lot before NBA or NHL if you're missing out on news. And definitely download the DK Live app. I think that's the biggest thing. Like you mentioned off the top, we're trying to become a bit more of like a breaking news site in terms of daily fantasy sports, and it's going well. I feel like as daily fantasy sports grows, things like that are going to become more prevalent, which is nice. So I can also check out, I have my own site, thefantasygrind.com. It's more of just like betting. I just go over the spreads each week and stuff like that. But definitely check that out too. Got some weekly articles up on the DK site. Right now, my DraftKings Upside article you can check out. But if you go to my Twitter handle, it's all there. That's why you love Twitter. You just go, you get everything at once.
Go follow at the Fantasy Grind right now. Jeff does a great job with all the content he does, doing some NFL, doing some NHL, doing some golf on the DK Live show. So you are a renaissance man in every sense of the word. Alex, of course, also want to turn the floor over to you before we call it quits. Anything you want to say to the folks before we say bye-bye?
Yeah, thanks everyone for watching. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to seeing more of you on The Sweat. And also, it's good to hear that you're giving some spread picks, because I've been kind of getting into these parlays that sites offer. It's totally throwing my money away, but if I can get someone else's picks, that means I can blame it on them instead of on me. And thanks FantasyDraft for sponsoring the show. The main event is one of the first tournaments you should put your money into every week because they charge the least. And I found out you actually win more money when you cash. And I found that out by getting third place. Usually you get 15% of the top prize, but I got 30%. So that was $15K more than you would win on other sites. And that is a lot of Hooters wings.
Wait, so Alex, real fast. So you're playing parlays. Isn't that the least plus EV thing you could possibly play in the world? You're so savvy about everything, and you're playing parlays.
Chris is calling me out here, putting me on the spot. But
I was just shocked because everything I know about you just threw it right back in my face.
Yeah, it's just plus EV gaming has a place, but there's also a place for a little bit of entertainment here and there. So that's what I'm going for with the parlay.
Now, I will tell one fast story because we did run a little bit short here. In college, I stopped gambling because I won a 7-team parlay with St. Mary's, and then I won it on the Clippers hitting free throws from Sam Cassell. And a 17 parlay that paid $7,000. Never gambled again other than a very sporadic betting at low volume because I was like, I can never beat this again. I've already this is the most money I'll ever make relative to it. I'd just given it back. So if college me can know that, I think you, the top DFS player in the world, don't play parlays, guys. Parlays kill you. But hey, maybe you'll prove me wrong, Alex. But either way, thank you guys for watching. Hit that like button before you go. Tune into all of our content coming up tomorrow. And of course, go check out DK Live's app and also check out at Fantasy Grind and at Osmo DFS and at Chris Spags. And we'll be back with you guys next Saturday. So thank you for watching and good luck.